Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz here in Chicago for the first day of the Democratic National Convention. On the NewsHour tonight, President Joe Biden prepares to speak not as a candidate, but in support of his replacement. How the convention has been revamped for the Harris-Walz ticket that's reinvigorated the Democratic base.
People are engaged, people are hopeful, people are getting involved.
Tamara Keith and Amy Walter weigh in on former President Donald Trump's efforts to counter-program the DNC with a tour through crucial swing states.
And the U.S. calls this maybe the last moment to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. A look at the efforts to at least pause the war and stave off a broader regional conflict.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation.
Two retiring executives turn their focus to greyhounds, giving these former race dogs a real chance to win. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your purpose, and the way you give back. Life well planned.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world, at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Democrats will kick off their convention tonight here in Chicago, a very different event than was being planned just 1 month ago.
Vice President Kamala Harris is set to formally accept her party's nomination for president later this week. But tonight will culminate with a speech from the current occupant of the White House, that's President Joe Biden, who ended his own campaign for re-election last month, clearing the way for Harris.
Laura Barone Lopez is here on the convention floor. She's been reporting on Harris's surge in polling. Laura?
Amna and Jeff, from business owners to college students, Democrats have a new sense of hope around Vice President Harris's nomination. And I've been speaking to voters here in Chicago to see if Harris can maintain that energy from now until November.
If he can make more of these, because people are coming.
At the Brown Sugar Bakery on Chicago's South Side, a new item has generated a lot of excitement. 68-year-old Robert Hawkins Jr. showed up an hour before the bakery even opened to make sure he got a taste of what's called the Kamala cake.
I had to come and get this particular cake because my wife wanted it, and I wouldn't have been able to sleep all night.
So on the inside, it's a traditional German chocolate cake, but the whipped cream has caramel and chocolate in it.
62-year-old Stephanie Hart is the owner of the bakery.
How did you feel about this election before she jumped into the race, when it was a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden?
Scared, nervous, worried.
Have the vibes changed in your neighborhood, in your community, since the race has changed?
Absolutely. People are talking, people are engaged, people are hopeful, people are getting involved.
Hart created the Kamala cake based on what Vice President Harris ordered when she paid a visit to the bakery in 2021.
And I'm so excited that we have a woman, that we have a black woman, but that we have somebody that can actually get into a ring and shut them the hell up.
Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it?
For Democrats, that excitement is now being felt across the country. Enthusiasm for Harris among Democratic voters has climbed dramatically, compared to before President Biden dropped out of the race last month. Trying to build on that momentum over the weekend, Harris campaigned across southwestern Pennsylvania with her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, before heading to Chicago.
And we will win. And we will win.
Several recent polls have shown Harris now slightly leading former President Trump nationally and continuing to gain ground among voters in crucial battleground states.
You let me know if you want to keep that tab open.
Inside Shenanigans on Chicago's north side, the city's first bar to employ all-female bartenders in the 1970s, Michelle Centano says the historic nature of Harris's candidacy is inspiring.
I am really excited about this upcoming election because it's just a testament for how far we've come.
She embodies a couple of different identities, and with that, I feel like comes a different approach intrinsically.
Another crucial demographic Harris has made inroads with, young voters. Sky Vera, a student at University of Illinois, Chicago.
It feels kind of like, okay, someone is in the running that looks like my neighbor or sounds like my aunt or, reminds me of one of the teachers that I had when I was growing up. It's refreshing and it's empowering.
Vera says two of the issues that resonate with her are LGBTQ rights and women's access to abortion. She also says the Harris campaign has done a good job of reaching young voters on social media. But the Biden administration's handling of the war between Israel and Hamas has her concerned.
Because she is coming from an administration that wasn't very quiet about the support for one side, that side being Israel, that a lot of young voters don't see that changing, unfortunately.
That's led thousands of protesters to show up this week to make their voices heard outside the DNC.
This year I will be voting, but not for a presidential candidate.
And why not?
Harris, I believe she's still complicit. I'm happy for her that she's running, but I'm not happy with the things that she's been doing.
Alex Otten, a Michigan voter, is open to supporting Harris if she changes her policy toward Israel.
I'm a single-issue voter in this regard. The situation in Gaza and how the U.S. supports it ties into a lot of the problems we have at home, and I can't ignore it. It's not something I can say, oh well, at least she'll support gay marriage, or at least she'll support trans people.
While protests remain peaceful today, author Craig Sauter still remembers what Chicago looked like when Democrats gathered here in 1968.
There were helicopters overhead. There were jeeps, army jeeps with barbed wires on them. They come not to arrest people, but they're coming swinging their clubs, firing tear gas into the crowd.
Sauter was one of thousands of protesters fighting for civil rights and against the Vietnam War. Scenes of violent clashes with police were broadcast around the country. And fights amongst Democrats broke out on the convention floor.
And I don't think we'll see that at this convention. It's going to be somewhat of a pep rally for Harris. So the party's totally unified and ready to go.
But back at the Brown Sugar Bakery, Stephanie Hart says there's still a lot of work to do before November.
I think it's important for us to not be fooled by polls, because I'm so glad she's up, but let's not play any games. There's a whole lot riding on this, and we need to make sure every day we're talking to somebody about what's at stake in this race and get out and vote.
Jeff, while protests were mostly peaceful earlier today, protesters have now broken through the security barrier just outside the Democratic National Convention. But also, as you heard there, we spoke to two key constituencies, black voters and young voters. Harris will need both of them in order to win in November.
We will certainly keep our eye on that security issue here at the convention. But Laura, Democrats have greeted the Harris nomination with a lot of enthusiasm. What are those voters telling you about how they feel about the policies she's put forward so far?
Jeff, Harris and her running mate have really leaned into their middle-class credentials, and Harris has recently been highlighting the fact that she worked at McDonald's during college in both a campaign ad and on the trail, and Tim Walz has gone after J.D. Vance and former President Trump for their Ivy League background. And that Stephanie Hart, that bakery business owner that I spoke to here in Chicago, specifically mentioned Harris coming from the middle class as something that really resonates with her. Other voters said that as well. Stephanie Hart employs more than 40 people, many of them women with children, and she said that she really likes Kamala Harris's child care proposals. And just this past week, Harris unveiled more proposals on that, saying that she wants to expand the child tax credit to some $6,000 for parents with newborn children, as well as $3,600 for parents the rest of their children's upbringing.
Well, let's shift our focus to tonight. You've spent the last few hours here inside this arena speaking to delegates. Give us a sense of the mood, Laura.
There's a palpable excitement here, Jeff, and in many ways right now inside of the arena, despite what we know what's happening on outside, this is a celebration of the Harris-Walz ticket because they have already been formally nominated and clinched the nomination.
You've also been speaking to those uncommitted delegates. These are Democrats who cast their vote in protest of the Democrats' pro-Israel policies. What have they been telling you?
So there are some 30 uncommitted delegates here, Jeff, and the uncommitted movement held a press conference this morning where they said that they are happy that Harris, they believe, is more empathetic to their cause, but they are waiting for a clear policy change. Specifically, they want to see an arms embargo and an immediate ceasefire. Now, Kamala Harris has said that she is working towards a ceasefire with President Joe Biden, and the administration believes that they're close, but we also spoke to an uncommitted delegate in Michigan, and he said that they are still waiting to hear from the DNC on whether or not they will be able to have a Palestinian American speak on the main stage this week. That is still an outstanding ask. And they warned that they believe that if Kamala Harris doesn't speak directly to them and if her policies don't change, that she could lose the 100,000 voters in Michigan who voted uncommitted during the primary.
And lastly, Laura, what can we expect tonight as this convention gets underway, day one?
We're going to be hearing from some big names tonight in Democratic politics, Jeff. House Democrats like Jim Clyburn, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Jamie Raskin. We're also going to be hearing from First Lady Jill Biden, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and of course tonight the big keynote address is coming from President Joe Biden himself, and he's going to be introduced by his daughter Ashley, and this is a marking of his legacy, Jeff. Very different than what the president initially expected, but tonight is going to be honoring his legacy and also a passing of the torch from him to Kamala Harris.
Laura Barone-Lopez. Laura, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, long before Chris Coons became a senator from the state of Delaware, he was a Capitol Hill intern for then-Senator Joe Biden. We spoke about their decades-long friendship, the president's speech tonight, and much more when we sat down earlier today. Senator Coons, welcome back to the NewsHour. Thanks for being here.
Great to be on with you.
Let's talk about your friend and this moment. Yeah. Because for someone who has spent 50 years of his life in public service, I think it's fair to say this is a complicated moment.
Yes.
When you talk to him, how is he viewing this moment right now?
Well, he's optimistic. He's looking forward. He believes that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are the best chance we have to secure our democracy. When Joe announced he was running 4 years ago at the Democratic Convention, when we kicked off the campaign against Donald Trump, he focused on restoring the soul of our nation. I'll remind you, we were in the middle of a terrible pandemic. It was a virtual convention. We were in the middle of an economic collapse. And just 2 weeks before he took the oath of office, there was January 6th, an assault on our democracy. Tonight, you're going to hear Joe Biden look back a little bit on just how much he's had to pull us through. I'm going to speak a little bit about how this man, who's been knocked down by life so hard, several times, helped us all get back up again, and how his courage, his belief in democracy and belief in all of us really is what underpins his incredibly selfless decision to step aside and let his trusted vice president carry the torch forward, hopefully, God willing, to electoral victory this November.
You have known him for 35 years.
I was an intern for Joe Biden in the Senate 35 years ago.
And when he first made the decision to step aside, you got a little emotional as you talked about it for the first time. Tell me what this moment is like for you, speaking before him, what you hope people take away from your remarks, and also understanding that this is not quite the speech he thought he'd be giving just a few weeks ago.
I hope when Joe Biden comes into the hall tonight that he gets the longest, loudest, most sustained cheers and applause people jumping up and down and shouting, "We love you, Joe," of any president in our history. There's been more conventions here in Chicago than any other American city. And he deserves to know that the American people, certainly the Democratic Party, loves this man for all he's done for us.
Is there any part of him that second guesses his decision to step aside?
Everybody second guesses their decisions. But the last few times we've spoken, he's really been focused on the future. We spoke just a few days ago. He was excited about the Cancer Moonshot event he was doing in Tulane. Dr. Biden is focused on education, on women's health. Together, they're focused on doing things for veterans' families, for military families. They've got a lot more to do, not just in the final 5 months that he's president, but going forward. And I'm excited to support them in that.
We have seen this race shift dramatically.
Yes.
In just a few weeks' time, the party quickly coalesced around Vice President Harris as the candidate. She set records for fundraising. You've seen battleground state polls now tied her ahead with a narrow lead nationally, and yet it's still a very tight race.
It is.
So where do you see the biggest challenge ahead for this ticket?
Well, I think the American people need to really look at who these two candidates are. Donald Trump has been really struggling to find his footing, and he chose an odd colleague of mine, J.D. Vance, as his running mate. And the two of them have some clear views. Trump just said this past week he wants to slap a 20% tax, a tariff, on every imported good. That would raise household costs by thousands and thousands of dollars with no clear benefit and would cost millions of jobs. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden just signed the announcement about 10 major pharmaceuticals coming down in price, things like Xarelto and Jardiance that we see a lot of ads for, $500 a month down to $200 a month. Caps on insulin, caps on out-of-pocket costs. What you're hearing from the Democratic leadership, from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, ideas for how to reduce housing costs, reduce daycare costs, reduce prescription drug costs for the middle class. What you're hearing out of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance is a willingness to abandon democracy overseas and let Russia take Ukraine, and a lack of a commitment to the middle class here at home. I'm hoping we get to have a campaign this fall that isn't just about personalities, but is about substance, because Joe Biden ran on substance and delivered substance.
I know we're going to be hearing more about some of those policies from Harris and Walz this week as well, but you're co-chair of their campaign. You want to get them elected. To do so, do you think that she needs to break with some of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, especially issues like on Gaza, where we know there's hundreds of thousands of people who voted uncommitted in the primaries that this campaign needs to bring on board?
One of the things that President Biden is working tirelessly on right now, where I'm hoping for a breakthrough this week, is the ceasefire deal that he took to the UN Security Council, to the G7, and is applying all the resources he's got from his diplomatic and national security advisors. I'd love to see that happen while Joe Biden's our president. But frankly, Vice President Harris has made it clear that she will stand firm with defending Israel against attacks from terrorist groups, either from Iran or from Hamas or Hezbollah, but has also expressed serious concern about the humanitarian condition on the ground in Gaza and the need for us to make real progress in rebuilding Gaza.
President Biden has 5 months left in office. As you mentioned, he has a lot on his plate, this ceasefire deal potentially, continuing to get support to Ukraine in their war, this cancer moonshot as well. What do you see ahead for him, for someone who has spent basically his entire adult life in politics, in public service? What does the next chapter look like? What do you see him doing?
He can be an incredible resource for future American leaders. I think he'd love to be a mentor, a guide, an advisor to the next president, vice president, to members of the cabinet, but frankly, equally to people who are just getting started in national service, whether it's elected or just public service of all kinds.
Senator Chris Coons, good luck on stage tonight. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
Meantime, back in Washington today, 3 House Republican committees claimed that President Biden committed impeachable offenses, yet they stopped short of recommending impeachment itself.
Their 291-page report is a result of a 1.5-year-long investigation. It contained few new details, but signals that the GOP effort to impeach Biden is now at an end. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins has been digging through that report, and she joins us now from Washington. Lisa, let's just kick us off here. Tell us, what does this report say?
Hi, Jeff and Amna. This report is really focused on allegations that the Biden family profited off of Joe Biden's position as vice president, and in specific, questions about whether Joe Biden himself profited and that he knew about the relationships that were being forged by his family. Now, really, at the center of this are two other Biden family members, James Biden, President Biden's brother, and then his son, Hunter Biden. They are known, they have said openly that they received millions of dollars in contracts with foreign businessmen for consulting, including some in China who were connected with the state energy complex there. But this report is an attempt to connect about 12 or 13 dots that Republicans said they found suspicious in testimony that they gathered over the last year and a half. But when you read through it, there are allegations that there were code words used to describe Joe Biden, but those are disputed. Others around Joe Biden say, no, those code words were not about Joe Biden. And in the end, there really is no direct evidence in this report, and I didn't see anything new in it today, that connects Joe Biden to the idea that there should be profiting off of his position as vice president. Nonetheless, Republicans say that the circumstantial evidence that they gathered was enough. Here is their conclusion from this report. They wrote President Biden's participation in this conspiracy to enrich his family constitutes impeachable conduct. So then what are they doing? They wrote in the conclusion, the committees present this information for evaluation and consideration of appropriate next steps. What does that mean? We don't know what it means. It means technically this seems to be at an end. Democrats are responding as if this is an end. This is from a White House spokeswoman who's talked to me today, wrote, this failed stunt will only be remembered for how it became an embarrassment that their own Republican members distanced themselves from, as they only managed to turn up evidence that refuted their false and baseless conspiracy theories. And I'm speaking with Democrats, they say it's no coincidence that this report came out today after a year and a half, the day that Biden is speaking to the convention.
Well, Lisa, tell us more about this evidence that Republicans insist that they have had all along. How do independent sources view that?
We spoke with a constitutional law professor at Loyola University, and she said that in the end, this really is just circumstantial evidence.
Even if President Biden in some ways kind of indirectly or vaguely made it easier for James and Hunter Biden to trade on the Biden name, I don't see in the report any of that rising to the level of the types of high crimes and misdemeanors that the founders envisioned when they put that impeachment clause in the Constitution.
Also notable, what's not in this report. One of the key witnesses early on that Republicans talked about was an FBI informant who was later indicted for lying about the Biden family. One other thing, Amna, the political reality here is Republicans just don't have the votes to pass impeachment on the House floor, and they know it. So this is the end of this investigation, as it seems for now.
That is our Lisa Desjardins reporting tonight from Washington. Lisa, thank you so much. Good to speak with you.
Let's bring in our Politics Monday team here to tick through all that we've talked about so far. Good to see you both.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So this convention will provide Kamala Harris with such an introduction to the biggest audience of her campaign. And Amy, just looking at the latest polling, there's a CBS News YouGov poll out yesterday that has her up 51% nationally, 51 to 48, and then she's tied 50-50 in the battlegrounds. You know, what more do Democrats need to do? What can they do to sustain this momentum moving ahead to November?
Yeah, I mean, that's why tonight is going to be very interesting and watching, of course, the president who was supposed to be accepting the nomination, actually coming here and endorsing his vice president. He wants to, of course, talk about his legacy. He wants to, as the reports are coming out, move forward, not just talk about the past, but basically passing the baton, passing the mantle to Harris. At the same time, part of the reason Harris is doing as well as she is that she's not seen as part of the Biden legacy. In other words, she's not as closely tied to decisions that the Biden administration made. To me, one of the most interesting data points I've seen so far from recent polling, this is the Washington Post poll, how much influence do you think that Kamala Harris has had within the Biden administration on economic policy and immigration? Only about a third of voters thought that she had significant influence on those issues. So on the one hand, she wants Biden to say nice things about her, of course. On the other hand, she's going to want a little maybe we can have a little distance here. I like you, but I've got to go my own way.
Well, Tam, what about that distance? I mean, we cannot really underscore enough how quickly this shift happened, right? I mean, it was just a month ago that there was a different person at the top of this ticket. We have seen some policies from the Harris-Walz campaign on the economy in particular come out. We expect to see more of them, but does she need to break more from especially problematic policies that have created issues with voters from the Biden administration? What do you see happening?
I think that what she has been doing is creating a tonal distance, but not actually a policy distance. You can see that on Gaza-related policy, where she talks a lot more about concern for civilian life in Gaza, but she still has the same position in terms of Israel and full support of Israel as it pursues this. In terms of the economy, she says, I know prices are high. You don't have to tell me prices are high. She talks about it in a way that is somehow more empathetic or just emphasizes things differently. And then just in terms of the tone of her campaign, and I think we're going to see this played out here in this convention, tonally, it's a very different campaign than the one President Biden was running. She is running a much more positive, forward-looking, even joyful, she would say, campaign. Biden talks a lot about democracy on the line, a tipping point, and really it was a darker campaign, and hers is a more joyful campaign, and that is another area of sort of tonal separation from Biden, though continuing to essentially the policies that she's been rolling out on the economy are Biden's unfinished business. They are the parts of the Build Back Better plan that just didn't make it through Congress.
Yeah,
well, that raises. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's such a great point about the difference between, say, the messenger and the message. But even on the economic message, this is what she's been talking about price gouging issue in particular. That's something we've been seeing down ballot Democrats talk about now for a while. Senator Bob Casey from Pennsylvania started running those ads in May. So it's not, I think that's a very good point, that the message is maybe slightly different. As I said, it's really much more about the fact that she can be seen as turning the page, even though the policies are not going to be drastically different.
Well, tonight is President Biden's night. Democrats will celebrate him, even though party leaders effectively pushed him out of the race. Tim, building on your previous point, how closely aligned does the Harris campaign want to be with President Biden, and how do they use him effectively moving forward?
Well, Biden is promising that he will be out on the road and he will be out campaigning. I don't know how much of that there will be. We did see them appearing together last week at an event about bringing down prescription drug prices, which is one of these things that got an applause line when it was in Biden campaign speeches, and now it gets an applause line when it's in Harris campaign speeches. But certainly, she is a different person. She is running a different campaign. You talk to Biden aides, and they say the speech he's going to give tonight is not a farewell address. They keep saying it's not a farewell address. It is a call to action. Part of that is that President Biden, he has said goodbye before. He doesn't like saying goodbye in a way that makes it be the end. When he dropped out in 1987, when he dropped out of the presidential race in 2008, when he dropped out, when he couldn't run again in 2016, every time he said, but I have more to say, or I will run again. This time is the last time, but he does have more to say, and he's going to try to keep saying it for the duration.
Guys, I'd love to get your take, too, on the fact that obviously the Trump-Vance campaign has also been counter-programming and they will be this whole week. We know they've been out and about. Here actually is what former President Trump had to say a little bit earlier today when he was speaking in York, Pennsylvania. Take a listen.
Very simply, Kamala Harris is an economy wrecker and a country destroyer. Our country will be destroyed if she gets in. Her radical liberal agenda ruined San Francisco. It ruined California when she was the Attorney General. It crushed our middle class, demolished our border, set the world on fire, and now she wants to be promoted to the job killer in chief.
Amy, when you take a look at that, what is the counter-programming strategy here?
She's using this opportunity, of course, to define herself, not so much for the room. You know, we talk a lot about in the past of convention bounces, that this is an opportunity for the nominee to really unify the party and they get something of a bump after the convention. I don't think that's going to happen here. Instead, I think it's so much more about speaking beyond this place that we're sitting in right now in Chicago, speaking to the independent voters who right now don't know much about her, but what they have seen, they do like. She's doing better among independent voters, let's say, than Biden.
And for Republicans.
And for Republicans, their job, they want to fill in the blanks, right? They want to be the ones saying, she's telling you this, America, but let me tell you, this is who she really is. Really tying her as closely as possible to Biden. And that's why tonight is such a sort of fascinating needle to thread for the Harris campaign. It's notable that this is happening on Monday, right? Which is not the highest profile night traditionally for a convention, and that this is not somebody who's going to be introducing her on her big night on Thursday.
Tam, I know you've been tracking the Republican messaging here too. What stands out to you?
Well, this is quite possibly the most active week that the Trump campaign has had of the entire campaign. He is going to have rallies in swing states every day this week. He has been doing one event a week, or maybe last week he held one rally and did a press conference. He has not been an active campaigner. He has not been going to swing states as much as you would expect from a very active campaign. This week is different. They're counter-programming and going to those swing states, many of which he's only visited a couple of times. So this is a shift. I do think that in terms of the messaging, they are still struggling to figure out what to make stick. And part of that is the clip you played is very much that is the message that Trump's campaign advisors would like him to stick to. However, every time I turn on one of his speeches, he's talking about who's more beautiful, him or Kamala Harris. He's talking about TiVo and random things. He is not on message. He is having difficulty figuring out how to talk about Vice President Harris. He has said that, he doesn't have a lot of respect for her, and he feels like it's okay for him to make insults on her intelligence. That's not really the best way to win over independent voters, including many independent or formerly Republican women who are trying to figure out where to land.
And we've heard Republicans say, we want him to stick message. We want him to stick to the economy. Politics Monday, joining us here in Chicago, Amy Walter, Tamara Keith. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, Pennsylvania is shaping up to be a critical state in this presidential election, with both the Trump and Harris campaigns spending considerable time and money there. Congresswoman Madeleine Dean represents the state's 4th district. That's a suburb of Philadelphia, and she joins us now. Great to have you back on the program.
I'm delighted to be here with you on this exciting night.
Well, look, when we last spoke in early July, you were among those Democrats who was supporting President Biden, even as party leaders were at the time privately suggesting he exit the race. You said he defeated Donald Trump once and that he had the record to do it again. I wonder what you make now of the way in which this party has so quickly coalesced around Kamala Harris.
Well, and I do stand by Joe Biden. What a record of accomplishment, 50-plus years, and I am delighted to see the kind of response that he gets tonight. It will blow the roof off this place, I'm certain.
As they start the sound check here
exactly,
as we're speaking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all the lead-up speakers before him. But I was also clear-eyed about the challenges ahead of us, and I expressed that to my caucus as well as to the campaign. I stand by the president in all of what he has done, all the accomplishments. I will say, alongside a Democratic Congress and a Democratic Senate, think of all the bills that we have passed that he spearheaded and signed into law that changed our economy, grew jobs. So I'm just delighted with where we are. The enthusiasm is palpable back in my district, in the 4th Congressional District, suburban Philadelphia. And delighted to be here. This is my first convention.
Really?
Yes.
So what do you expect we'll hear from President Biden tonight as he makes the case for Vice President Harris as the party's nominee?
I think we will hear more of the accomplishments and the record that they have set. And you can talk, number one, about the economy. We have seen Donald Trump and J.D. Vance try to talk about the economy. They've put forward Project 2025. They've put forward the notion of big tariffs and mass deportations. That will be incredibly inflationary. Every economist tells us that. So they'll talk about the economy. He will talk about the accomplishment of growing 15-plus million jobs, bringing inflation down, bringing manufacturing back, bringing the Safer Communities Act into law. Which is actually saving lives from gun violence. It's just such a stark contrast of going back to something that was incredibly dark and caustic to our democracy, as capped off by January the 6th, as you well know. Just a very criminal, corrupt set of norms for the former president. We're not going back, as my granddaughter says, who's 3. We're not going back. We're going forward for the American people, for my children, our grandchildren, for the economy, for the environment, for education, for women's rights, for freedom.
All of the enthusiasm, energy, unity on the Democratic side, is there a risk that that masks the fact that this is still a competitive race? And as one Democrat today told me, this is Donald Trump's race to lose.
I absolutely think you're right. We mustn't get overly enthusiastic and so rose-side glasses that we think that this is going to be a cakewalk. It is not. In my district, suburban Philadelphia is going to be the place to watch. Pennsylvania will be the keystone state again. We have to dig in. We have to do the work to protect our democracy, to grow our democracy. And what a better place to do it than in the birthplace of our democracy. So I'm also clear-eyed about that. This is not just such enthusiasm that you win a presidential race this way. We have to dig in and do the work and tend to our democracy.
Are Democrats in a better position to hold the House, or rather win the House, in your view, with a Harris-Walz ticket than they were with a Biden-Harris ticket?
I feel the enthusiasm, and one of our worries was that there was perhaps people would sit out the election, particularly the congressional elections, not knowing the difference between a majority and a minority and what difference that makes. Take a look at the difference that it has made this Congress as Democrats went into the minority. We passed 6 massive big bills when we were in the majority. This year, the Republican majority can't get out of their own way. You saw what they did in terms of having a speaker. You saw what they've done in terms of passing budget bills. They let us go home a week early in this incredibly crucial cycle because they couldn't get their own members to do the work of passing budget bills with a seriousness about governing.
You represent a solidly Democratic district. President Biden won by some 24 points back in 2020. In many ways, what happens in your district is a case study for how Democrats might vote across the country. How are they responding to Kamala Harris and to the policies she's put forward?
Well, I've been doing a number of canvas launches and helping people get their literature together, picking up their signs and getting their turfs to go knock on doors. And I will tell you, I've met person after person. One man in particular, he walked up to me and he said, "I'm not even sure that I know you, but I know you're my congresswoman. I am 59 years old. I have never put a yard sign up. I have never contributed to a campaign. I've never knocked on a door for a candidate. I'm in." That's really the feeling we are getting in our district. People are in. They want to do the work of democracy because they recognize how important it is.
Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And let's head back now to Washington, where William Brangham has a look at the day's other news. William.
Thanks so much, Amna. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Israel today and said this week's talks about a ceasefire in Gaza and a hostage release were, quote, the best, maybe the last opportunity to release those hostages and at least pause this war. Nick Schifrin is here, and he has been following this all along. Nick, what is the state of these current talks?
Blinken said today that Israel had accepted language designed to bridge the gaps between Israel and Hamas. This is Blinken speaking today earlier to reporters in Tel Aviv.
The critical next step is for Hamas to accept the bridging proposal that Israel, or Prime Minister Netanyahu, has now accepted, and then to engage with everyone else on making sure that we have clear understandings of how each party would actually implement the commitments that it's undertaken in this agreement.
So what does that mean? Recall that there is an overall agreement on the framework for the first phase, a 6-week ceasefire, the release of more than 30 hostages from Hamas and 700 Palestinian detainees from Israel, and a humanitarian aid surge in Gaza with a phased Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. But, William, regional officials tell me that the two sides remain far apart, especially over changes that Israel has demanded in the last 6 weeks that this bridging proposal language is designed to overcome. That includes, number one, this. Israel insists on control of Rafah and the Philadelphia corridor, that is between Gaza and Egypt. Hamas this weekend called that, quote, an obstruction to reaching an agreement. Number two, checkpoints inside Gaza to screen Gazans moving from south to north. Number 3, Israel is insisting that the more than 30 hostages released in the first round all be alive. That is new. That was not part of the last deal, and U.S. officials do not believe there are enough female, elderly, or infirm hostages to release that number, so actually American hostages might be moved higher than the list. And number 4, Israel is insisting on being able to veto the release of certain Palestinian detainees, something Hamas again called, quote, new conditions and demands. And overall, the public statements from both sides really reveal that the gaps remain. Here's Netanyahu speaking today, quote, I greatly appreciate the understanding that the U.S. has shown for our vital security interests, but Hamas yesterday said, quote, the new proposal responds to Netanyahu's conditions, aligns with them. Tonight, William, Hamas has just given an interview saying that they have already conceded what Israel said was enough, and they are not in the mood for any new conditions.
So why is it making this deal, perhaps this week, so critical?
U.S. officials believe that if there is no deal this week, Iran and Hezbollah are likely to follow through on their vow to attack Israel for 2 high-profile assassinations in Tehran and Beirut, one of which Israel accepted publicly, one of which they did not. That attack would likely derail instantly any of these talks about Gaza, because U.S. officials still believe that the best way to forestall an Iranian attack, and frankly, perhaps a war between Hezbollah and Israel, is a ceasefire in Gaza.
Nick Schifrin, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Also today, officials in Connecticut say at least 2 people have died after as much as 10 inches of rain caused catastrophic flooding over the weekend. Eyewitness video caught water raging down roads in the southwestern part of the state, submerging cars and stranding drivers. Authorities rescued 18 diners at a restaurant that was suddenly engulfed by the nearby Little River. Today, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal said some businesses will not be able to recover from the damage.
They have no flood insurance. Because who would have thought the Little River would turn into a gushing torrent of destruction, which is what happened.
Separately, Ernesto has regained hurricane strength in the North Atlantic, bringing dangerous surf and rip currents along the East Coast. It's due to weaken as it passes Newfoundland, Canada, tomorrow. Italian authorities say that 1 body was found and 6 people remain missing after a luxury yacht sank this morning off the coast of Sicily during a sudden storm. British tech entrepreneur Mike Lynch is among the missing. His wife and 14 others were rescued. Today, near Palermo, divers searched the calm waters under blue skies, a sign of just how quickly conditions shifted from last night's storm. The British-flagged Bayesian was known for having one of the world's tallest masts, measuring 246 feet, as seen here lit at night before the disaster. Russian authorities said today that Ukraine has damaged a 3rd bridge in the Kursk region. It's the latest strike in Ukraine's nearly 2-week incursion into Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky said today that Ukraine now controls more than 480 square miles of the region. He says the goal is to create a buffer zone to prevent cross-border attacks by Russian forces. Meantime, Ukrainian civilians are fleeing the eastern city of Pokrovsk as Russian troops advance on that area. Authorities have ordered families to evacuate the city and nearby villages. Back here in the U.S., a judge in Wisconsin has sentenced a woman to 11 years in prison for killing the man who trafficked her for sex. Prosecutors say Crystal Kaiser shot and killed 34-year-old Randall Volar at his home in 2018 when she was 17 years old. He had been sexually assaulting her for over a year. Kaiser's lawyers claimed she could not be held liable for the killing because of a state law that absolves sex trafficking victims of, quote, any offense committed as a direct result of that trafficking. Former New York Representative George Santos has pleaded guilty to wire fraud and identity theft in his federal fraud case. The disgraced Republican left Long Island courtroom this afternoon, where he admitted that he had, quote, betrayed the trust of his constituents. Santos had been charged with stealing from political donors and using campaign contributions for personal expenses. He faces more than 6 years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. On Wall Street today, stocks built on their recent gains to start the week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added more than 230 points. The Nasdaq jumped nearly 250 points for its 8th straight winning session. The S&P 500 also continued its winning streak, adding 54 points. And a passing of note, Phil Donahue, known to many as the king of daytime television, has died. The Phil Donahue Show, later simply called Donahue, first launched in 1967 in Dayton, Ohio. From there, it ran on national TV for nearly 3 decades. Unlike previous talk show hosts, Donahue would walk up and down the aisles of his studio audience, inviting them to weigh in. He would devote entire programs to one topic, including frank discussions on race, sexuality, the AIDS epidemic, and faith in America. Sometimes they were scandalous and sometimes cerebral, like this moment with Nobel economist Milton Friedman.
Did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy.
His program racked up 20 Emmy Awards, and earlier this year, Donahue received the highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Donahue also met his future wife on the program, actress Marlo Thomas, who appeared as a guest in 1977. They were married for more than 40 years. Phil Donahue was 88 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, in a new book, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia details his experience during the invasion of Ukraine.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Since Ukraine's incursion into Kursk, Russia has postponed rare talks between the two nations that were scheduled for later this month. Those talks were to discuss a possible halt on attacks targeting each other's energy infrastructure. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's allies warned that Ukraine's incursion has increased the chances of world war. That saber-rattling is a routine Russian tactic, and one few people have seen as closely as the most recent former U.S. ambassador to Russia, who has written a new book and recently sat down with Nick Schifrin.
Over the past decade, the U.S.-Russia relationship has deteriorated to its lowest point since the Cold War. Election interference, attempted international assassinations, cyber warfare, and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Ambassador John Sullivan had a front-row seat to all of it, first as Deputy Secretary of State and then U.S. Ambassador to Moscow for Presidents Trump and Biden. And his new book is Midnight in Moscow, a memoir from the front lines of Russia's war against the West. John Sullivan, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. Let's begin with Ukraine's incursion into Kursk, Russia. How will that affect Vladimir Putin's thinking?
Well, it's already affected his standing within Russia and Russia's strategic calculations with respect to Ukraine. They were surprised by this. Putin was embarrassed by this. It reveals some of his weaknesses. The fact that the Russians were unprepared, that the Russians who are being slaughtered in this area are conscripts who are not supposed to be sent to the war in Ukraine. We've seen video of what's happened to them, surrendering, killed, and so forth. The Ukrainians have occupied, 1,000 square kilometers of territory? It's a big deal. Even the Russians on social media and in state media who are pro-war and pro-Putin are asking, how could this have happened in our country? But Putin can't admit to weaknesses like that.
Let me ask about another big Putin decision, that is to make a deal with the United States and European countries, the largest prisoner swap since the end of the Cold War. You were in the middle of multiple discussions about how to get detained Americans in Russia released, including, of course, Paul Whelan, who was part of that swap. Let me first ask you, why do you think Putin made this deal?
The key piece of the deal from Putin's perspective was this FSB colonel named Krasikov, who committed a murder
in broad daylight.
In broad daylight, in front of children and families in a park in Berlin, on orders of the Kremlin to kill an opposition leader from Chechnya. This was an officer of the FSB tasked by the Kremlin I'm sure, by Putin himself to eliminate this individual.
Why was he so important to Putin? What do we really know about their connection?
So Krasikov has relationships, as I understand it, with the organization that provides Putin's bodyguards. So this is personal. He knows this guy, or he's close to people who know this guy. He's one of them, FSB colonel. That's his group. So it's personal. It's professional in that it's important for him to send a message to his security services. You get an order like this in the future from me or from the Kremlin, you know we're going to stand by you and we can get you out.
What were your negotiations like with the Russians to try and release these American detainees?
Well, the problem that we had, particularly with someone like Paul Whelan, when I was ambassador, and then subsequently with Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter, was that they were charged and convicted of espionage. The Russians would say, we've arrested an American spy. You come to us with potential trades of cyber criminals, a fraudster here.
And those are the people that the U.S. ended up trading.
But more than that, they got back Krasikov. What happened before was, Nick, we didn't have in U.S. custody someone that Putin really wanted. In this case, it was the Germans had him. So the trick to the key to the deal was broadening the scope to include the Germans.
The book begins the night of the full-scale invasion. You describe this scene where you end up going to the embassy in the middle of the night and staying there, living there, basically. And you blame the FSB, the successor to the KGB, for their intelligence failure to think that Russian invasions, the Russian full-scale invasion, would succeed and be welcomed by Ukrainians. Why did they fail so much at that?
There were two basic failures. First, the FSB didn't prepare the battle space. We had thousands of FSB officers who had spent years with billions of dollars invested to weaken Ukrainian resistance. And secondly, they failed to advise the Russian president that the Ukrainian resistance was going to be as strong as it was.
Because they didn't know, or they couldn't tell him the truth?
It's a combination of both, I believe. There's a common phenomenon that we believe that Putin's larger circle of advisors are afraid to tell him bad news. Imagine if you're a senior FSB officer, the FSB has been given years, thousands of personnel, and billions of dollars to weaken Ukraine, and your assessment is, now's not a good time to invade. I wouldn't like to be the person delivering that message.
You write that the only suitable strategy for the United States and the West must be a form of 21st century containment of Russian aggression. And of course, Russia must be stopped in Ukraine. What does a 21st century of containment look like?
Well, first, it's got to be based on an acknowledgement that Putin is never going to surrender his war aims. The notion that the United States, anyone in the West, is going to be able to negotiate a resolution to this war that doesn't involve complete capitulation by Ukraine is wishful thinking. I've seen members of Congress debating aid to Ukraine, and why are we supporting Ukraine? Why are we more concerned about Ukraine's border than the southern border in the United States? It's not just about supporting Ukraine. In fact, you can believe, as I think I've heard the Republican vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, say, I don't really care about Ukraine. Okay, but as a U.S. senator, you need to be concerned about Russian aggression. That's what this is about. It's opposing Russian aggression, which I believe is necessary for U.S. national security.
Let me just ask you a few questions about Donald Trump. You were his deputy secretary of state before you were the ambassador in Moscow. You write in the book that Trump had a, quote, undisciplined style, the White House was chaotic, unpredictable, and that the president, quote, could not or would not draw a distinction between his own interests and those of the country, and, quote, Trump has no interest in the ordinary duties of his office. What impact did that have?
It made my job difficult as deputy secretary and stressful. So after 3 years, on a personal level, it made me think about getting off the hot seat, I was pretty burned out after 3 years of the unpredictability and lack of discipline. It was just difficult to implement policy when the ground would seem to be shifting under our feet.
Quickly, will you vote for him again? You voted for him last time.
You know, I did not support him in the Republican primary this time. I supported Governor Haley, whom I worked with closely when I was deputy secretary. But as I write in the book, I've been a lifelong Republican. I cast my first vote for president in 1980 for Ronald Wilson Reagan, he coined I think it was he who coined what he called his 11th commandment, thou shalt not criticize a fellow Republican. I believe I will vote for the Republican candidate for president this year, who is Donald Trump.
Tom Sullivan, the book is Midnight in Moscow. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. My pleasure.
Let's return now to Chicago, where Amna and Jeff will be hosting special coverage all night at the Democratic National Convention.
That's right, William. We will be here bringing you live speeches from the convention stage, interviews with key Democratic lawmakers, and in-depth analysis of it all.
And that starts tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. We hope you'll join us. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here soon.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.